Sherlock Holmes goes on holiday. Sherlock Holmes was studying some travel brochures from the recently established firm of Thomas Cook when there was a knock at the door. "Forgotten your key again?" he asked, opening the door to his friend Dr. Watson. "How did you deduce that?" asked Watson. To Holmes it was simple. It's partly the way a flock of geese adopted a distinctive V formation as they overflew the cemetery, and partly the sound of leather on willow coming from behind one of the larger sarcophagi. But mainly it's the nature of your face. "Mobile, Holmes?" asked Watson, to which Holmes replied that, on the contrary, it was more like a caravan, slow and hard to get around. Watson entered and, noticing the travel brochures, asked, "Holiday, Holmes?" Holmes replied that he was indeed planning a holiday, but that he couldn't decide what form it should take. Some years previously he'd visited Europe's major cities by train, but it had been most unsatisfactory. "Accommodation unsuitable?" asked Watson, to which Holmes replied that, on the contrary, he'd had a most commodious compartment with every modern convenience, but a murder occurred on the train, and he'd remained aboard to solve it, while his fellow passengers disported themselves in Venice Lido and the steam baths of Budapest. He'd also tried cruising, but that had led to an unfortunate incident with an elderly widow, and he was lucky not to have found himself in an Egyptian prison. "Ever thought of camping?" asked Watson. Holmes conceded that he hadn't, at least not as a form of relaxation. Watson urged him to consider it. "You just pack your gear and the world's your lobster." "Oyster," said Holmes. "Not at the moment," said Watson, "but I'll take one for Lord Smallpiece. He had an all-night sitting followed by an early day motion. Said I'd see him at the pudding club this evening. Help him keep his pecker up. An oyster and a helping of spotted dick should do the trick." Watson could see that Holmes remained unenthusiastic about camping, so offered to show him the ropes. "I'll dig out my old army tent," he said, "and my shorts. It'll be a bit of a squeeze, mind." "In that case," said Holmes, "I'll bring my own shorts. Where do you propose to go?" "South of France," Watson replied without hesitation. Holmes balked at the thought of the expense involved. "It won't be expensive if we use one of these no-frills rail lines. Easy train will take us all the way from Victoria to Dot-sur-la-Map." "Dot-sur-la-Map?" asked Holmes. This was a place of which even he hadn't heard. "Probably in the middle of nowhere," said Watson, "but I expect you'll be able to catch one of these newfangled charabancs to the campsite." Their journey was rather noisy, the train being full of stag-doos and hen parties, but it was cheap. As Watson had predicted, Dot-sur-la-Map was in the middle of nowhere, its main feature a war memorial commemorating a battle that had been fought there. Not even Watson, with his military background, could understand why anyone would want to fight a battle over it. "Perhaps they were fighting to get out," said Holmes. They found a charabanc stop, and the timetable told them that they were in luck. There would be a charabanc to the campsite the following day. So they pitched their tent beside the stop. Hammering in their tent pegs was so difficult that Watson wondered at the nature of the rock. "Sedimentary, my dear Watson," said Holmes. Next day they arrived at the campsite. It was pleasantly situated in a citrus grove. "A lemon entry, my dear Watson," said Holmes as they walked through the gate. "Ideal, Holmes," said Watson. It was a typical late Victorian campsite. Germans with their recently invented Mercedes, Italians munching their freshly baked Garibaldi biscuits, and camp reps bending over backwards to please. They pitched their tent. Then Watson went in search of coq au vin, while Holmes pored over his French phrase-book. By midnight, both were satisfied, and they fell into a deep sleep. The following morning, Holmes found himself alone at breakfast. Assuming that Watson was off on another Gallic symbol fantasy, he was about to begin his coffee and croissant when a strange woman approached and wedged a note among the croissant, before disappearing into a throng of Russians who were having their morning vodka with a splash of tea. The note read, "If you want to see your friend alive again, meet me by the spring that provides the source for the 2-million-year-old water that they bottle and sell at extortionate prices." 2-million-year-old water, thought Holmes. That must be well past its sell-by date. I wouldn't pay a centime for it. Unwilling to meet a strange woman on an empty stomach, Holmes finished his breakfast, then made for the spring that the note had mentioned. When he reached the spring, he found Watson spread-eagled on the ground, the jack-booted foot of the strange woman on his chest. "I see old habits die hard," he said to Watson. But before Watson could reply, in one seamless action the strange woman discarded her hat, then her bodice, and was about to remove the first of her 6 petticoats when Holmes realised that she was none other than Professor Moriarty. "You'll never get away with it," he exclaimed. "On the contrary," replied Moriarty. "I've already replaced the peerless Granny Smith with a bland French apple. Next." Before he could finish, Inspector Lestrade emerged from a nearby tent. An Easy Train Express had gone missing, and he was following a line of enquiry. "Arrest this man," Holmes called to Lestrade. "On what grounds?" asked Moriarty. "What man?" asked Lestrade, who was still under the impression that Moriarty was a woman, and to whom he'd taken something of a shine. Moriarty insisted that his question be answered first. "The grounds of Dot-sur-le-Map," Watson told him. "The man with his jack-booted foot on Watson's chest," Holmes said to Lestrade. Without replying, Lestrade drew his Webley from his shorts and levelled it at Moriarty. A loud crack split the morning air. No one was sure if it was the report of Lestrade's Webley or one of the recently invented Mercedes being started. All they knew was that, when the smoke had cleared, Moriarty had vanished and the Schmidt family were off on a jaunt. That evening, sitting outside their tent with a bottle of Armagnac, Holmes asked Lestrade what had made him suspect that the strange woman was in fact Professor Moriarty. "Was it your innate ability to sense when and where a crime is about to be committed?" he asked. To which Lestrade shook his head. "Your Metropolitan Police training?" asked Watson. Lestrade shook his head again. "A deep understanding of the criminal mind, perhaps," said Holmes. Once again Lestrade shook his head, drained his glass, then said, "Sherlock Holmes."